update. We're going to record this session today so that we can post it on online as part of the stakeholder involvement quest. So just so you know, the agenda, like we always do, we'll spend a few minutes on the background. Each time we'll spend a little less time on it just because you've all heard it before. And then talk a little bit about the schedule and timeline, public outreach, and then the main focus of today is to give you an introductory look at the some highlights of the hazard ID and risk assessment that's well underway, almost complete. To discuss with you a few lingering items and that we need to help making decisions with, and then time permitting at the end, we've gone through and from the mitigation strategies that we went through in the local teams, we've put together 2 documents. One is sort of a disposition of the 2016 actions as best as we understand it from the meetings, and then a second document is the list of carry forwards for each jurisdiction, as well as some suggested strategies. So at the end, time permitting, we just want to get a discussion started about new strategies. We don't expect to have time to finish it. That will be done in our, completed in our next round of one-on-one meetings, which will be in May. A little bit on background, again, it's the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 that requires this plan be completed and then updated every 5 years. Purpose is to encourage actions that reduce losses of all types, and the update is required in order to be eligible for certain types of hazard mitigation grant programs, specifically the post-disaster HMGP, the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, and the new BRIC grant program, which we talked about last time. So that's the short version of why we're doing this update. The components of the plan, every time you do an update, you have to go through the entire planning process again, which we're obviously doing now. That process requires stakeholder and public involvement, which we're going to talk more about and accelerate in the next month with the first public meeting in a few weeks from today. Requires a refresh of the capability assessment, which is pretty much done from our meetings, our one-on-one meetings last time. We'll be sharing that with you soon. And then the hazard ID and risk assessment needs to be completely updated each time to reflect better available data, things that have changed, new disasters, etc. We'll be focusing some time on that. Vulnerability analysis and loss estimation is required, and then a new hazard mitigation strategy to sort of continue on and continually improve and adjust from last time, and then finally an implementation plan. So those are the major steps in the process. Most of you have been through it before. In terms of project schedule and timeline, I think we showed some version of this at all the previous meetings we've had, but essentially we are at the milestone workshop 4. The last the kickoff meeting was workshop 1. There was a series of local meetings in between, and we're at the point now where we have the items and bullets under that workshop 2 either done or mostly done or ready to go. Again, in May, the next step will be to finalize things, which is easier in the smaller groups. And then our next meeting like this will be to look at a draft plan, or pretty close to a draft plan, and start to make revisions and get consensus on that. In terms of the actual calendar of events, been saying fairly consistently all along we're about a month to a month and a half behind. The good news is that's not getting worse. So today we're at the Mitigation Advisory Committee 2 in April. Next month we'll do another round of the local planning team meetings, and our first public meeting on the 4th, which again we'll talk about. And originally we're scheduled to submit a draft to VDEM for review after the 3rd larger committee meeting in July. That will probably be the tail end of July or in August. So we're still overall, project-wise overall, in good shape. And then sort of once it goes into VDEM, it's a bit of a black hole in terms of how long it takes them to review it. But the good news is if your plans are expired or expiring, typically by the time it reaches them for review, they're not going to tell you you're ineligible for grants. Usually if it's if it's a good plan and it's sitting in the review queue. So what I'm trying to say with all that is we'll be safe with the timeline. Nothing to worry about at this point. The public outreach strategy, if there is one thing to worry about, it's probably the public outreach strategy. So we need to ask you for some help on this between now and the May 4th meeting, and then shortly thereafter. We've talked to Michael about setting up a project website and owe him a few things to get that done. There will be an online survey that will be made available simultaneously, and that we will probably ask all of the jurisdictions to share either on your websites or to email to any listservs that you have, any stakeholders that you have. Real simple 10 to 15 question survey. Doesn't take us long to put it together. It's all electronic, and we get the results back as soon as people fill it out. So we will be reaching out for help distributing that. Virtual workshops and public meetings. There's 2 formal ones that'll be scheduled. The first one is May 4th. It will be probably about a 15 or 20-minute version of today's hour-and-a-half long meeting, where we'll also, if anybody shows up, provide links to the survey. We are doing a story map. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's basically a link on a website, and it takes you to the map of the jurisdictions. It shows you some of the hazard data we have: floodplains, wildfire zones, other mapped hazard data, and it gives people the opportunity to drop a pin on a location and provide comments about an issue or a problem or something they think needs attention. So normally we use that for the public, but we'll also probably be asking the people on the team here and the local teams to spend some time looking at it to help us supplement some things like stormwater problems and landslide problems, and give us anecdotal data to fill gaps where we're missing data. And you'll see where some of those are as we go through the rest of the presentation. Videos, we're videotaping these meetings, as I said, and we'll put those videos online. We may ask you to help with that if you're able to do it on your websites, just so that we can try to get people to involve that way. And then closer to a draft of the plan, or as pieces become available, we'll also reach out to neighboring jurisdictions and other stakeholder entities, and we'll be asking for your help to identify who they should be. But all of this, you've heard me say a few times now, and now is actually the time where it needs to get started, now that we're starting to have some tangible things to discuss with people. So on the hazard ID and risk assessment, again, the purpose is to provide a factual basis for prioritizing the actions that you want to do and get funded. The pieces of it, there's a hazard ranking. We talked about that, and we've made some tweaks to that we'll show you in a minute. Profiling of the hazards, updating the history, things that have changed since last time. This plan will also need an analysis of climate change impacts as they affect each of the different hazards, possible exception of earthquake. Then location, extent, occurrence, probability, loss estimation, the different impacts, and then making sure it's all consistent with what's in the state plan. So those are sort of the pieces of the update that we're doing for each hazard. Some changes since the 2016 plan. We've updated the hazard ranking, incorporating your feedback. We'll show you that in a minute. And then we're changing up some things in the analysis. So HAZUS, for those who aren't familiar, is a FEMA loss modeling software. It has modules for earthquake, hurricane wind, and flooding. In the past, we've used it for hurricane wind and earthquake. We've updated that already. We'll show you the results. There's a new version of HAZUS since the last 2016 plan. And then we're in the process of using it for the flood risk assessment, which has not been done in the district before. We've used components and data from HAZUS, but we've taken some parcel data from you all and did an sort of outside of HAZUS analysis, and some of the functions in that analysis that assign damage to certain depths of flooding, et cetera, are getting a little outdated. And FEMA specifically last time why we didn't use HAZUS. So we're gonna use it this time. The answer to their question would have been because it's a real pain in the neck to use and it doesn't always work very well. And we're experiencing that right now. We always manage to find a workaround, but the flood model is very difficult to run. So that's actually in process. We had hoped that would be done by today, but it should be hopefully in the next week or two in time for the meeting. So that's one big difference. We'll talk about dam inundation and pluvial flooding or stormwater flooding that we know is an issue for you all from these high intensity rainfall events that don't necessarily cause out of the bank floodplain floods, but they cause nuisance and stormwater flooding. And then this time, most of the plans in Virginia and North Carolina have a severe weather section that looks at hail, thunderstorm, and kind of the generic storm-related things that aren't captured in flooding and wind. For whatever reason, the West Piedmont plan did not have that section before, and it's relatively easy to add, so we've gone ahead and created another section for those type of events. There'll be new maps based on updated data, and then again, I mentioned the climate change impact profile in each hazard. So these are the natural hazards. We'll talk more about the man-made ones in a little bit. I won't go through these. You're all familiar with what you currently have in the plan. For the ranking, similar to the last plan, we use this kind of 4-tier approach where we look at probability and history, vulnerability, what actually happens if you do get it, what is the geographical area that's impacted, and what's the warning sign. And you can see across the top row in gray, each one of those is weighed kind of as an importance factor weighting. So probability in history is the highest weight. The vulnerability, or what gets impacted, is the second highest weight, etc. And you can see it ranges from negligible to catastrophic. And when you pick and choose from all these, which you did in 2016, and add them together in an algorithm with the weightings, it gives you a level of prioritization for the plan. So you get the C11 column, there's the 2016 prioritization levels that you all had using the same process, and then the 2021 level. So at the top, we flip-flop flooding and winter storm based on your feedback. They both ranked high, but the indication was that flooding is more of an issue than winter storms. So that one didn't really change much, but we just flip-flopped the two and adding that pluvial flooding to it. Severe weather, as I mentioned, was a new hazard, and we ranked it. You can look at our ranking and tell us if you agree or disagree, but we put it in at medium high. And then we heard from multiple people that tornado and earthquake should go kind of up a notch, because with all these crazy high intensity storms, they're spawning more tornadoes, and people thought that the earthquake risk was a little bit low. So we adjusted those. So the changes in 2021 are in the yellow boxes. They're not anything huge. And then for the human caused hazards, we left the ranking exactly as it was, and we'll talk more about them a little bit later. Some sources of data that we use for the updated federal disaster declarations, different types of assistance provided, mostly public assistance. We'll look at the NOAA's National Center for Environmental Information gives us a lot of good historical data on events and damages. It's kind of a clearinghouse for that stuff. It's not perfect data. It's not 100% complete data, but 9 times out of 10, it's the best that we have. So it's what we typically use. And that gives us information on areas impacted, damages, and a description of the event, so that we can use those things for updates. We updated major disaster declarations. I believe there is at least one new one for tornado in 2019, and then the hurricanes, tropical storms. So these numbers are updated and gives totals, and this is just through FEMA's kind of history, and we use these sometimes in our probability calculations. Critical facilities we updated. There weren't a ton of changes. You can see some of them on the left. There was a building converted into a firehouse in Stewart, food line building conversion in Patrick, new station replacing an old one in Danville, and added Meadow Elementary School, decommissioned the John Brett Elementary School, and one other one primarily decommissioned. So essentially there are very minor changes to critical facilities. We added the changes and reprojected them on a map that we could use for analysis. So loss estimation approaches, I mentioned HAZUS already for flood, hurricane, wind, and earthquake. We'll go through those results, or at least for hurricane, wind, and earthquake. And then some other types of analysis using some of that NCEI data, the NFIP losses, public assistance, et cetera. We're able to look at numbers of events over a period of history and get some idea of what the probability is in the future. Similarly with damages in the past, kind of doing an annualized analysis of what they might look like in the future if it continues, the trends continue as they have been in the past. We can also downscale losses from the Virginia state plan. And then for some hazards, more challenging like wildfire, where dollar losses are not always that accurate, we can talk about specific events that we're aware of and sort of extrapolate some of those losses and make some guesstimates. We're trying to supplement the ones we can with exposure analysis, which looks at basically everything that's at risk. It's not the same as loss. Losses are actually what you lose. Exposure is everything that's sitting in harm's way and what it's worth. But we've done that for flooding and wildfire. It was not done for flooding last time. I believe it was done for wildfire. So now let's quickly go through each of the hazards. Flooding, again, at each of these cover slides, we just show you the prioritization ranking is the same as you've seen in the table. This is just a simple map of the FEMA mapped floodplains in the area. It's not of much value, but it's here to just show you that these are the floodplains we use for this exposure analysis that I'm about to show you. So various different tables in here. This one is by parcels. So you get the two cities and the counties here. Shows you the total number of parcels, which is based on updated data that you all provided. The number of parcels that are at least partially exposed to a 100-year floodplain. The percentage of those parcels that are in the floodplain, and similarly for the 500-year. And that may not mean much to anybody, but you'll see where we're going with it in a minute. So this next one is value based on that. So it looks at the overall value of all the parcels and what's on them in each of the jurisdiction. The total 100-year exposed value is the 100% value of all the parcels that even touch a 100-year floodplain. The next column is the weighted percentage of those columns of those parcels that are in the floodplain. So you can see it's significantly less. So, for example, in Danville, it's $108 million of exposure based on the weighted parcels in the floodplain, which is a pretty big number. But again, that doesn't mean that's what's going to get destroyed or lost. It's just what's there potentially in harm's way. And then the analysis is similar for the 500-year event. And this is just a GIS exercise we're able to do. This is very similar. Analysis is just by acreage. And this may or may not be all that meaningful in the plan, but for example, if you wanted to participate in FEMA's community rating system, for example, this is data that you need to have and calculations that you need to make, because some of the point credits that you get that impact flood insurance are based on what percentage of the acreage in your community is in a floodplain versus what percent is an open space, what percent in the floodplain is an open space, et cetera. So it's Well, it's slightly extraneous data for this presentation. It does have a purpose and a use, and it's not that hard to create, so we created it. So additional flood analysis, again, I mentioned the HAZIS that's underway. Dam inundation and pluvial flooding we're going to talk about in the next steps after we get through the rest of the hazards. So flooding, the most important hazard, still has some work to do, but the good news is in the final stretch. Just lastly, on flooding, we pulled the National Flood Insurance Program statistics, and this shows by jurisdiction, the number of policies in force, the number of repetitive loss properties, severe repetitive loss properties, and then the total number of claims that have occurred since you joined the flood insurance program, and the net payments on those claims. So the Plain District Commission area has had over $10 million worth of flood insurance claims since the jurisdictions joined the program. And then surprisingly, the rep loss numbers are pretty high. 22 out of 112 policies in Danville is a pretty high percentage. So that's something that we'll need to look at in terms of the mitigation strategies. Winter storms, just the ranking again. These are events from 1996 to February of 2019 from the NCEI storm events database. If you take the number of events and the different types of damage that they provide, and you take the number of events and divide that number by the period of history, you can get annualized numbers. These are also, I believe, bringing up to 2019 dollars. So yeah, interestingly, you can see that on an annual basis, if you were planning to plan for disasters that way, you can see the numbers in property damage, annualized crop damage, and then total annualized damages. I will give you the caveat that this data is largely collected by county, so it's not, and occasionally you'll see, for example, if there's $1 million in Virginia or part of Virginia and they don't know exactly what damage was where, occasionally in the database they just spread it across all the impacted counties evenly. So these numbers are not super accurate, but they're, for relative analysis, they're what we have. We'll supplement this with public assistance damages, which equally have their flaws, but it gives you some type of snapshot of and again, these are damages, so they're not expenditures on snow removal, they're not expenditures on debris and other actual costs associated with winter storms, some of which are picked up by FEMA public assistance when you have a disaster. So it's just one type of cost annualized. This is just a map that shows the number of events annualized so you can see from 2.2 you can expect 2.2 noteworthy winter events up to 3 noteworthy events if you look at history between 96 and 2019. Hurricane wind. We did a refreshed map of tropical depression storms and hurricane tracks since 1980 to 2020. So we got a 40-year history there. You can see that Michael is on there and a few of the other more recent ones that weren't included, previous plans. Then we did a series of maps. We didn't put them all in the presentation, but talking about winds and peak gust speeds in certain different types of probabilistic events. So 10-year event, less than 50 miles per hour across the region. 50-year event, 50 to 65 mile an hour winds across the region. And then when you get up into the larger events, like the 100-year, then you start to get some variation. across the region, a little bit higher to the east as opposed to the west. This is total exposure. I believe that's an aggregate, or no, I'm sorry, this is total exposure by census tract. And then from the HAZUS, these are annualized losses. So in the plan, we'll provide losses from all the different scenario hurricanes, but this is them combined and made into annualized losses. And you can see the different categories from buildings and contents to rentals and wages and more economic losses. Also in the buildings category, we'll have the ability to look at residential versus commercial, industrial, institutional, and break those numbers down. We just didn't want to have a million tables in here, but you can see that this on an annualized basis gives you losses in each of these categories. And with HAZUS, we're able to get down into the smaller jurisdiction level and not just the counties. So all of this is updated. And obviously, we're going to give you time to look at this at your leisure and not absorb it in a presentation that we're trying to get through quickly. Taking those annualized losses, this is just a map that shows you where they tend to be higher. Again, by census tract, I believe. And then severe weather we talked about. We added this map again shows annualized events from the database. Obviously, it's driven by the size of the geography of the area. So this is probably not. This is a map that we may not use in the plan because it's just biased by the size of the geography. But we ran it just to see what it would look like. So annualized events by jurisdiction. Again, interestingly, in NCEI, some types of events you can get down to the small town level. Other types are by county only. Severe weather events, we're able to drill down. So this is 1955 to 2020, so a longer period of record. And severe weather is lightning, thunder, downbursts, hail. I think that's all, and maybe straight line winds. So, and it's only reported damages. So annualized events range from 7.7 in Franklin County and Pittsylvania County to 1.4, 1.8 in Martinville and Danville, respectively. Again, partly a function of geographical size. Annualized damage from these types of events, you can see the numbers in the total planning area. Again, reported only from this one database, 335,000 a year. Annualized crop damages, and then total, and then there's also deaths and injuries in there. This is just a breakdown of the types of events. So yes, strong wind, thunderstorm wind, lightning, high winds, and hail. And you can see the number of events and what types they were. Some looks like high winds and thunderstorms sort of win the day in terms of what was recorded anyways. Tornado. Again, these are just updated numbers by the intensity scale from 1953 to 2019. And I keep saying 2019 because the database, there either hasn't been any events, or for some of the hazards, it isn't. It's usually a year behind in its updates. So we captured the 2019 Franklin County tornado in here. I think there was one, let's forget the name, whatever it is, before it turns into a tornado. So there were, I believe, only 2 new events added since the last plan update, and then we remap them. Usually we have points, but occasionally they give tracks, a start point and an end touchdown point and a final touchdown point. So you can see the 2019 event in Franklin was an F1. It looks like, and then you can see where it touched down and where it went. Probability and annual losses, again, based on that same history. You can see the percent chance in any given year and the annualized losses from tornadoes based on limited historic data. Wildfire has some challenges with wildfire. So this table shows this from Virginia Department of Forestry. It shows the number of wildfires by year in each of the county jurisdictions from 2009. And I think we actually have data going back further than that. We just didn't want to put it all on the slides to, again, to 2019. And so the total number of reported wildfires. This is a map also from VDOF that looks at low, medium, and high risk areas. I'm assuming that those are wild and urban interface areas, intermix areas, and neither of the two are the 3 tiers. That's usually the way a lot of jurisdictions map them. We have additional mapping that's extremely similar, where we could do a comparison if we wanted to. So we took that and we looked at exposure again in terms of acreage, total acreage in the jurisdiction, and what of that total is in each of the risk areas. So those should all add up to the total. Then exposure analysis based on value. And again, this is 100% exposure. It's just everything that's in those 3 zones. It's not a loss estimate in the low, medium, and high risk areas. We looked at historical wildfire damages. This table is only showing 2007 and 2008, but it goes back a long ways. So if you look at the damage total in the far right-hand column, and it doesn't add up to the total damages in the 2 years that we're showing, it's just because we're only showing you a portion of the table. The numbers and total damages for 7 and 8 should be in thousands. And then for whatever reason, we are unable, and we've tried to find any data on damages that is after 2013. So we're going to have to think of some ways to either fill those gaps with anecdotal data or other records, or somehow extrapolate, but it just seems like the data on damages just sort of stopped. So that's a hole that we're hoping to figure out how to fill in the next week or so. This is critical facilities in the 3 risk zones based on the updated critical facilities, low, medium, high, total, and percent high risk. This is just a map showing the same. And then annualized events, we do get so the loss numbers stop at 2009, but the event numbers go through 2013. So they still capture the events, just not the losses. So the losses in the second column you'll see are annualized through 2008, and the events are annualized through 2013. So again, if you know of any data available to supplement this, we'd be happy to hear about it. The state plan didn't in 2018 didn't seem to have any numbers that were any newer than the ones we were able to find, which makes me think it was probably related to a budget cut of some sort that never got filled, again, which is not entirely unusual with data, large data. But it's something that shows trends. For drought, again, drought is always one of the harder ones to quantify. This just shows the Palmer Severity Index for the whole country, just so you can get a feel for where you are by comparison to the whole country. Again, based on the NCEI database from 1998 to 2019, the annual number of drought events annually is basically, we've got close to an event a year, and that looks at meteorological, agricultural, and hydrological droughts if it gets there. So it's pretty good chance you'll have a drought at least every year, every other year, but it doesn't always escalate beyond a meteorological drought, which is just a lengthy shortage of rain, into an agricultural one, or the hydrological ones are obviously the much bigger, longer term ones. But it shows that it is definitely a risk to an agricultural area. This map shows pasture land and cultivated crops, just to give a feel for the fact that Franklin County and Pennsylvania County seem to have a slightly higher risk by percentage of cropland than Henry and Patrick County, but not by a whole lot. But it just gives you some feel for how agricultural the area really is. Apologize for all the emails popping up. For whatever reason, our new system, even when you turn it off, you still get notifications. This is crop losses due to drought events for 21-year period, 98 to 2019. So you can see pretty significant, $10 million in Franklin County, $7 million in Pennsylvania, etc. And then those same numbers annualized. So pretty significant losses, actually, even if when compared to other hazards, they're higher. They're right up there. So so that's interesting. And then earthquake. This just gives epicenters. It shows only one in the Planning District Commission area, and that's back in 1828. But there's been plenty of them around the area, and this is updated all the way to 2021. And these are magnitude 2.5 and greater only. And as this was done to look at losses, again, we'll have losses available for you for multiple different magnitude earthquakes. And for the buildings, again, we'll be able to break that down by residential, commercial, industrial, institutional. But these are the types of categories of losses we'll have for each of those. This table is the annualized version. So there's the numbers. Pretty wide spread across the different communities. And obviously the counties, with the exception of Danville and Martinville, the county numbers are obviously much higher than the smaller towns because they're so much larger geographically. But those are those numbers, and we've added them alongside a total exposure just so you can see. We could calculate percentage. Landslide, again, a very difficult one. This is just a map from the last update of the state plan that shows occurrences from 1950 to 2016. It shows none in your region. This is a landslide category map that shows some of the high susceptibility and incidence combined. So interestingly, this map shows no incidents, but this map starts to creep in with higher incidents and susceptibility. So we don't have any good reliable numbers um, that we can use, or damages that we can use to do probability and annualized damages. One thought that we had with this is, at least on that story map that I mentioned before, I know that there's been some landsliding around the region from some of the high intensity rainfall events. So we're going to ask all of you, plus the public, plus the stakeholders, to drop pins on that story map and tell us what you know about areas where there's been landsliding, you know, what happened, what year, how much damage, etc. So we can at least supplement this with some anecdotal data, because there's really not much here. And there wasn't much in the last couple plan updates either. So we're hoping to be able to expand that a little bit with some input. That is a quick overview of the number crunching piece. I think I told you most of the next steps already. Again, for flooding, you're going to do that hazard analysis for all those different return frequencies, 10-year through 500-year events. We'll do an annualized run. I talked about the building types already, and the model also gives you some debris calculations for different types of events, which is good for planning purposes, because oftentimes debris removal is one of the bigger expenses after flooding and hurricane events, and winter storm for that matter. Stormwater flooding. We talked about this in our proposal, and we know it's important to you, and we want to do something with it in the flooding section. We've been sort of getting through the rest of the hazards, honestly, to see kind of what type of budget we'll have, which will dictate the type of analysis that we can do. So this gives a range of some of the ideas we have so far, and we'll probably get more input from the PDC, exactly what we're looking to do. But it ranges from, again, using the story map to start collecting anecdotal data on where these problem spots are. That's obviously the easiest and cheapest alternative. And then a topographic based analysis where we could take like 10-year rainfall events, which are the common, large but more common events, and start plugging them into detailed topographic data to identify where ponding and shallow flooding and low intersections and things like that are throughout the region. That can be taken a step further by developing 10 and 20-year depth grids. I have folks checking on the old flood insurance studies now to see if those were developed in the past. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. If they were, we may be able to use those. And then the last method is to run an approximate RAS 2D stormwater model for the region. We certainly can't afford to do that within the scope of this project, but what we're going to do is the best that we can with the budget that we have in consultation with the PDC, and then in the strategies make a recommendation for this is how this could be made better. So it's going to be a big step in recognizing that particular type of flooding hazard, but there'll be a lot of more things you could do to fine tune it in the future. So that's in the to do column. Dam inundation. This is one I need some feedback on from you. Dewberry's been involved with the Beaver Creek Reservoir Dam project in Martinsville, and has or will soon have breach inundation mapping for that one. So we'll be able to do an exposure analysis. So my question to you all is, do you have other inundation or breached layers available in GIS that we're not aware of that could be included? And I'll pause there for a minute to see if there's any ideas or discussion around that. Okay. We could talk about that more at the local team meetings too. I just wanted to get people thinking about that because for some reason in my mind there was more inundation mapping available than just for that one dam. If in fact it's only that one dam, then we'll start with that, and it's still a better step in the right direction. But
we
that's
do have one here in Danville. Now that I think about it, we've got a study for a Goodyear Golf Course has a dam inundation map. I'm not sure it's on our GIS layer, but we received a study a few years ago.
okay. Goodyear Golf Course. All right. When we have our next meeting with you in May, if not sooner, we'll reach out and try to get that. And even if it's not in GIS, we should be able to digitize it. It's fairly easy. All right. And then this part is intended to be more of a discussion too. So these are the human caused hazards that are in the plan. Dam inundation we already talked about, and we're on our way to figuring out what to do with that one. But for the other four, they were added in 2006. Human caused hazards are not required to be in the plan. And during our local planning team meetings, we didn't get a whole lot of interest or learn of any changes to the threats. So we're honestly looking for your feedback on what we should do with these. As I've told Michael in a conversation with him, we can give these minor updates, refreshes if things have changed, and it's certainly within our scope to do that. We're not trying to wiggle out of that by any means. But the question is, would those dollars better be spent on, for example, the stormwater analysis or something else? And I guess it sort of came down, Michael and I decided that maybe we ought to ask this group, do they need to be updated? We've already asked you if you're aware of any changes. We'll ask you again in May when we have the smaller meetings. Or, one alternative is to not do much with them, which has been the case in the last several updates. Another alternative is to make the decision that now's the time to decide that they don't belong in this mitigation plan, and maybe they become a separate document of their own, or the historical document addresses them. I don't have a strong preference either way, but they're just sort of, we're getting close to the deadline and we need to make a decision on what to do, and it's entirely your decision. But I just wanted to, before we start spending resources on adjusting them, sort of have this conversation about people's thoughts. The state and FEMA don't care too much about them because human caused are not required to be in the plan. Most of the jurisdictions in Virginia and North Carolina around you do not include them. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, or if there's anything I'm missing that has changed or happened. I'm interested in hearing about that too. Is anybody speaking into mute? All right. This is why we're asking the question about whether they belong here, because we sort of sought input several times, and it's not our plan, so we don't want to make decisions for you. But maybe I can talk more offline with the PDC folks and get some feedback and thoughts on how we might proceed with these. It may be as simple as leaving them in there and just, saying that nothing much has changed since 2016, but it's still a relevant analysis. Or if we can discover things that have changed, then we'll address it.
Scott, this is Eric from Franklin County. I'm sorry, I was pulled away for just a second. What was the question? I apologize.
No worries. we're talking about the human cause hazards that are in the plan.
Okay.
I don't know if you missed the dam inundation. We already sort of addressed what we're going to do with that one, but with the other ones, I was saying how, you know, they were added to the plan in 2006. They've only been sort of dressed up a little bit since then, and other updates just to incorporate anything that has changed, which has been very little. And through our series of meetings with the communities, I haven't heard a whole lot of interest in these, and we're trying to figure out where resources are best spent. I don't know if you missed or were available for the discussion on stormwater flooding, for example. That's an area where we could use resources. So the question was, does anybody have any feelings or thoughts or know of anything that should be addressed with regard to these? Should they be left alone and just sort of cleaned up and freshened again? Or is now the time to make a decision that they don't really belong in this plan since they're not required, and capture that data, you know, separately somewhere else? So that was sort of where I was at, and I'm not hearing many or any opinions actually.
Okay. Well, thank you for the recap. I appreciate it. I'm sorry for kind of being here
No
at the
worries.
11th hour. I know that, and I'm not sure who even might be on here from Franklin County, but I'll presume to say that I know that we're going to certainly need to take a very hard look at pipeline failure, since we've got the Mountain Valley pipeline going across the county now, and that was certainly not an issue in 2016. You know, we really don't have any significant changes in dam power lines or our concerns to agri-terrorism that I'm aware of, or the spills. And as we've mentioned in previous messages, and I know that that's not necessarily on the human cause side, but you know, our you know, FEMA's going over our flood zones right now. So, but you know, just looking at this slide, the pipeline issue does leap out at me on behalf of Franklin County, at least.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So again, if we keep them in there, that's certainly exactly the type of information we need to know. If the Mountain Valley pipeline has been added or, you know, changed, that's something that's changed since 2016. So that's relevant to include. Yeah.
This is Tim from Danville. You know, we haven't had really any changes. Danville does have a major pipeline that's, you know, goes through the city, and there's also there's another one as far as our regional hazmat team is concerned. We're also responsible for not only the Mountain Valley when it comes through Pennsylvania County, but we also have Transco and several others. So pipeline is an issue, and we also have you know, 3 chemical plants within our response district here, as far as the hazmat team, which all 3 of them are in Pennsylvania County. They're not in the Danville area, but the Danville hazmat team is responsible to go into those 3. So, you know, there again, I'm kind of like with Franklin County. It's I don't see where they're changing, but it may be something worth leaving in the plan.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and then the only other thing I'll remind you is that if they're in there, there's supposed to be strategies to address mitigation. And it looks like FEMA's been fairly lenient on that in past plans, largely because they don't require human cause. And the purpose of this conversation is certainly not for me to try to convince you to take them out. I'm just trying to figure out what level of analysis everybody's going to be satisfied with. I think if we can add things that we know have changed and say that nothing else has changed and that's all we need to do, then that doesn't take many resources, and we can do that and move on. It sounds like, at least from Danville and Franklin County, I'm hearing that that's the approach that we should take. Right. I won't belabor this one any longer, but if you have any ideas or thoughts that you want to share with us, I'd be very interested in hearing them. All right. As you can hear, I've been losing my voice over here, so I'm going to let Jade take over and start the next section of the show.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to be taking you through the updated mitigation goals and objectives, and then the strategies that we've started to develop based on those. The purpose of these is to reduce societal, economic, and environmental exposure to hazard impacts. And overall, we've just been doing a lot of simplifying with them, make it easier to manage. So the HIRA that Scott just took you through, that is done and required to be updated during every plan update in order to inform the mitigation strategies. Like he said, when you include a hazard, the idea is you have specific strategies that link back to that hazard. So that's why it's important to make sure we have a good handle on what hazards are important to us and what we want to look forward to doing about them in the future. Next slide. Just some definitions to do some level setting. So we did update the goals. These are more general guidelines. It's what we'd want to achieve. And then as we move down, it gets more specific. So out of those goals, we have specific objectives tied to them. These are measurable actions that we can do to achieve our goals. And then even more specific, we have strategies, which we will be developing for you guys. And these are very trackable. They should be something that is highly achievable, very specific, and have basically all the paths laid out to achieve them, such as funding sources, responsible parties, timeframes, etc. So goal development, if you guys remember, you had 9 goals in your previous plan. Each one of those goals had specific objectives tied to them. So we wanted to go through and simplify them based off of the feedback that we received during the local planning team meetings. So how we went about doing that is we reviewed the goals, found that they really fit into 3 strategic categories. These were physical projects, which covered goals 1, 2, and 3, capability and capacity building projects, which goal 1, it kind of had elements of both. So it's also included here along with goal 4, 5, 8, and 9. And then finally, public awareness and education, which cover goal 6 and goal 7. So we broke the previous goals out into the categories so that we could develop the new and simplified goals. So the first goal that we developed out of those 3 from the last side were based on physical projects. So reduce future damages, losses, and risks to the community by protecting new and existing built infrastructure. This includes homes, businesses, utility infrastructure, critical facilities, other property, and it's protecting all these from the effects of hazards. Goal 2, focusing on capability and capacity building. So this is looking at more internal processes and especially future development, not only current development. So this is to ensure local ability to mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from hazard impacts by enhancing the capabilities and capacities of local governments through regional partnership, the efficient use of new and existing technology, and the implementation of hazard mitigation policies, regulation, and planning. And then finally, the last goal that we developed, goal 3, which is focusing on public awareness and education, implement education and outreach programs and campaigns to increase public awareness of hazard risks, promote hazard mitigation's importance to health, safety, and welfare, and enhance public engagement. And we will distribute those goals to you guys. We certainly want your feedback on them. They're what you guys will be focusing on. Those were just some edits we made based off of the local planning team meetings when you guys said you're okay with us taking a first shot at making some changes to those. So getting onto the objective development. So each of those goals have specific objectives that are tied to them. The previous plan, they range from 1 objective to 4 per goal. So there was quite a few. And we wanted to simplify these because all of the strategies that you guys choose to include in your plan need to be tied back to a specific goal and objective, and it can get a little bit confusing and tedious to tie them back when you drill down and get too specific. So again, we wanted to simplify. So just as an example of how we did this, we have 2016's Goal 5 and the objectives on the left. We took a look at each objective and we narrowed down exactly what it was trying to get at, and we used those to develop the new objective. So you see objective 5.1 on the left, respond to and recover from disaster was the main idea. So we use that to develop the idea of increasing resilience in objective 1, and we did the same thing with the other 2 objectives. Those played a role in coming up with objective 2. So goal 1's objectives, this is goal 1 again. And Scott, if you hit it one more time, the objective should pop up. So the one and only objective for goal 1 is to implement cost-effective physical hazard mitigation projects at the regional and local level to reduce the exposure and vulnerability of people and property. So this felt like this one only needed one objective. It covers the gambit of physical hazard mitigation projects rather, that FEMA is known for helping out with. So, then we have goal 2's objectives. The first objective is to integrate hazard mitigation principles into new and existing government planning, policy, regulation, and actions to increase the resilience of public infrastructure and services and protect future development. Objective 2, utilize mapping, drones, trainings, data, and other technological tools to improve the capability and capacity of local governments before, during, and after a hazard occurrence. And again, these are focused on not only protecting current people and property that you guys have, but also future development as well. So that's why it's really focusing and honing in on capacity building. Goal 3's objectives. So objective 1, develop programs that help the public carry out actionable activities they can implement in the near and long term to mitigate and prepare for hazards. And objective 2, implement education and awareness campaigns through social media and partnerships with local media and businesses that educate the public on what risks hazards pose to them and how they and their community can increase resilience and better respond to those hazards. All right, so those were just the goals and objectives that we went over. The mitigation strategies were developed from those goals and objectives. We have a couple of items that were attached to the meeting invite as of this morning, I believe. So we have the 2016 strategy disposition. When we talked to you guys at your local planning team meetings, we got a lot of really good feedback on how the mitigation strategies from the 2016 plan were coming along. We compiled all that information into this disposition table. So basically it lists all of the strategies that the jurisdictions chose in 2016 and includes the current status of those strategies as of 2021 with the descriptions as well. And from that, we were able to determine if there are strategies that you guys wanted to keep, if you wanted to remove them, if they were in fact completed and you don't need to focus on them anymore. And we used all that data and analysis to come up with some 2021 strategy recommendations. So this is the other document that was attached to the meeting invite. And I should say both of these are drafts. We would really appreciate it if you guys could review them and give us some input so we can keep on developing and working with them. The 2021 strategy recommendations document, that contains all of the carryover strategies from the 2016 plan that you guys indicated you would like to keep focusing on, as well as our recommendations, our recommended strategies that we wanted to put in front of you for consideration. And in that document, I also left some blank spaces at the bottom so we can get some ideas and input from you guys if there were some new strategies that you wanted put into the plan. This especially would consider any very specific projects related to pieces of infrastructure within your jurisdiction. It really helps us understand what you think is most at risk and what you want to focus on. Just a little summary of the 2016 strategy disposition table. So out of all of the strategies, 212, 51 were marked as completed, 102 were in progress, and 59 were not yet started, but are still in the works or plan to be in the works eventually. 53 of the strategies were requested to be removed for this next plan. 159 are the carryover strategies, and 89 are carryover strategies that you indicated you wanted some modifications made to them. It was either because you had completed them and you wanted to further continue with the same idea, just make some changes, or in some cases, we want to make sure that FEMA gives us or checks. We want to check all of FEMA's boxes for these strategies. So we want to add some metrics just so they're easily trackable and show that they're very actionable strategies. Okay, so for this next portion, we wanted to go into the new strategy discussion. So like I said, we wanted to get your feedback from these strategies that we're recommending. So like I said, the strategy document, the 2021 strategy recommendations document should be attached to the invite if you wanted to open and take a look, and we can discuss some of the options that are there.
Yeah, and what I can do is, we don't have a lot of time left, but what I'll do is, so you've got the disposition document. It's like 32 pages long, but only 2 or 3 pages are relevant for your particular jurisdiction, so you don't have to go through the whole 130 or whole 32 pages. But if you could look through that and make sure that we captured your desires properly at the local team meetings, we appreciate that. Or if you want to elaborate on any of our comments. So that's one ask, kind of a homework assignment. And then the second one in this strategies and recommendations is your carryovers from the last plan. Plus we added a bunch of recommendations at the end. And what we wanted to do to kind of close out this meeting is look at some of those recommendations, get you thinking about it, and then we'll be very shortly scheduling the next round of local team meetings. So before that meeting, at that meeting, we want to be able to finalize your mitigation strategies for 2021, or as close to finalized as we can. So these two documents, if you could give them some attention between now and then, would be helpful. And we'll send you reminders. I know nobody's going to want to do it after an hour and a half long PowerPoint presentation, but let me at least share a couple of the recommendations. And I will say, just kind of being blunt, FEMA, I've said this last time, I think, is pushing for specific, measurable 5-year type of strategies. And there's a lot of strategies in the 2016 plan that are pretty vague, like consider doing this or continue to do this. And while those are good things to do, and you should be doing them, just when you're going through it, think like, if this is something we do, like the first one in all the plans was to provide technical assistance to the public about making buildings stronger when they come in, to the office. If that is something that you're doing already, let's get rid of it and put it in the capabilities. Try to, not encouraging you to get rid of stuff that you like at all, but the push is from FEMA and the state is to move more towards specific measurable things. So instead of, don't feel like we need to have 25 strategies for every city or county. If, it may be 6 or 7 or 8 that are something that you might actually accomplish in the next year, or that are, that are measurable. So we threw some examples in there. These are examples. Some of them are from other jurisdictions in Virginia. Some of them are from other places. But so this table, just so you know what we're getting at. So all these ones with the Y's and the C's and the N's, it's these are ones from the 2016 plan with the disposition that you told us you wanted at the meetings, and these are by the jurisdictions across the top. So those are for you to look at. The ones in gray are ones that you told us could be removed, and mostly it's because they're too vague, or they're not going to get done, or whatever the reason was. We might have taken some liberties with these based on our opinions, so look through them anyways and make sure that you agree with us. So that's that. As you can see, there's a lot of them, but a lot of them are repeats. And I'm just scrolling down to get to the new or suggested ones. Okay, so some ones that we throw in there for your consideration are the ones in green. And I guess that's all explained in the legend down here. And some of these are for, there wasn't a specific strategy table in there for the PDC last time. Sometimes there is for a council of government or a planning agency or a PDC. So some of these may be for the PDC, and we'll have to talk about that. I'm springing this on David and Michael right now because we haven't even talked with them about it yet. But one's like support member municipalities or jurisdictions with subsequent updates of the regional natural hazard mitigation plan by tracking activities, et cetera, et cetera. Some things that you may already be doing. Another PDC one, maintain and update a regional mitigation webpage. Annually notify communities about grant opportunities. Support storm ready and other things. So these are all sort of like things that the PDC is probably already doing. Their support role things that are important. So this is kind of a way to document them for the PDC. Distribute resources, monthly social media posts, maintaining a mitigation webpage, etc. This is sort of just adding some metrics to some of these things. Explore opportunities to reduce risks from fire in rural settings through increased resources such as dry hydrants, drafting equipments, and tankers. So also what we did in these recommendations is we scoured through what everybody had, and we looked like if there was a hazard like fire, for example, that was really light on strategies. There were some hazards that didn't have strategies. We're really surprised that FEMA let it through that way. So some of these ones you see, like this one on the top for opportunities for these things, is added for that reason. And some of them, in order to be eligible for a grant, for example, if you wanted to get grants to put in more dry hydrants, you've got to have a strategy in there that addresses that. So some of these are kind of catch-all strategies, so that if you apply for that grant, FEMA looks back at your plan to see if you identified it, and there it is. So dry hydrants, tankers, drafting equipment, those three things are very different, and different communities may need different ones, but it's made to be a catch-all. There's a JS one, flood mitigation actions for roadways, whole community preparedness type of things, NFIP compliance, maintaining storm ready certification. A lot of you got that since 2016, so this is maintaining it. Requesting your rep loss and severe rep loss lists from VDEM or DCR every year, so that you can keep on top of that and develop strategies to deal with those. These are from other Virginia communities. Keeping that up to date by providing FEMA with their form that they ask for periodically. Damage assessment data in GIS with photographs and videos and coordinates and injuries and damage. A lot of you said you're starting to do that. There's a system in place, I can't think of its name, that some of you are using. That one I feel is an extremely important one to have in there, because that data helps so much when it's time to look for grant money. So that, I would encourage that one to be in every single jurisdiction's mitigation strategy if it's not already. Stormwater improvements, site inspections of schools for tornado safety, debris removal plans, education related ones, ditch maintenance, traffic lights. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all these, but you get the point. These are put in there for your consideration. So between now and the next set of local team meetings, which will be shorter and focused almost entirely on this, we'll ask you to go through here and say, like, and just like check the boxes for your community. Interested, maybe interested, forget about it, whatever the case may be. And then there's just a bunch of blank space for brainstorming and coming up with things. These are generic, obviously. There's the brainstorming should be like things specific to you. There's a specific culvert problem in Danville, or a bridge in Martinsville, or something in Stewart, or a building that needs a generator in any jurisdiction. Like this, the more specific, the better. But we just wanted to give you some catch-all ideas to consider. And then we're going to end with brainstorming, but I think with 10 minutes remaining in a 90-minute presentation, there's probably not a lot of interest in doing that. So I think we'll save that for the smaller meetings.
Before we move on from this, I just also wanted to add, it would be helpful when you guys take a look at this, some of the recommended strategies that we have there. If you are interested in one, not only marking in your column that you're interested, but also letting us know how often you'd want to do something, or anything related to a specific metric. It's a little bit difficult for us to know how often you want to do something, so that would help us finalize these strategies for you guys.
Yeah. And at the meeting and at the next round and after that, we'll talk about costs and responsible agencies and timelines and all that stuff that has to be in the plan. Right now, we're just trying to kind of capture a list. So you have those documents when we set up those meetings with you in a month or less from now. We'll remind you again and send them to you again, but any help with that is appreciated. All right, so final slide. Next steps. Oops, of course it brought me there. All right, next steps. Mitigation Advisory Committee to review a draft of the strategy disposition table. We just talked about that. Public engagement meeting on the 4th. We'll be reaching out, if not later this week, next week, to ask for your help in advertising that meeting. The goals and objectives, that second table that we just looked at. We need to deliver an actual draft of the risk assessment for you to review, because obviously it's a lot to absorb in a short call. Public outreach, the online survey will be done prior to the May 5th or May 4th meeting. The story map will also be done and ready to post. We'll work with the PDC to at least get them up on their website so that you can link your websites to it or your social media pages. But we're really going to need your help with that to get FEMA to be and VDEM to be satisfied with that. So after that, we'll set up the meetings. We'll have a draft mitigation strategy for the jurisdictions to comment on and choose from based on your input. So basically, we'll take your input on those documents we just reviewed, and we'll try to finalize them and get them back to you in the month of May for you to have like a finalized mitigation strategy table to look at and provide feedback on. And then the idea is a draft of the plan in the late June, July timeframe, so that you have 3-4 weeks to review the whole thing before it gets submitted to FEMA by the end of July. And then the stakeholder engagement, as I said, we're going to have to ramp up between now and June. But those are the immediate next steps. A lot to do, but I think we'll make it as easy for you all as we can. With that said, are there any questions or comments or discussion items? All right. If there's no questions, then we made it through with 6 minutes to spare, and I appreciate the time. And we'll be in touch shortly with a couple of these small asks and some meeting date suggestions for the local planning teams. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.